really delighted to be here. So I have a number of roles in my community. I'm a county councillor in Norfolk, representing North Walsham. I'm a district councillor in North Norfolk, representing the other side of North Walsham. I've got an additional role, which I know will probably concern many of you, which is finance, estates, and property services. So part of my team are looking at what the future of our assets is going to look like. I have been a town councillor for this town, which has got 13,500 people in it, but I have been a parish councillor for a much smaller area. But today I'm representing in a slightly different role that I have, and that's where I support, work with, and train parish and town council clerks and staff in strengthening their skill set. So I've
Oh,
got,
are you?
sorry.
Yeah, carry on, Lucy. Yeah.
No, so I've got multiple hats, but my primary reason for presenting today is that I too, like some of you, am facing the future of both devolution and local government reorganisation with the same level of uncertainty and with many of the same concerns that have been aired already. So what we're going to talk about today, some of you are fully aware of what devolution is, some of you aren't aware, and some of you possibly it won't affect you just yet, or you've been through the other side and will be able to put some people's worries to bay. So I want to explore what this means for local democracy, because we have got massive changes coming. And as we saw with the general election, when there are big changes, the public generally become quite concerned. And we know that when information is spread incorrectly, it can widen those concerns and create anxiety. I want to start with the impact on devolution, which many people will know as the mayoral combined authorities. There is some confusion over devolution and local government reorganisation or reform, depending on which way you discuss it. I want to talk about the unitary model, mostly because some places it works, but in areas where there's concern about it working, I think we need to cover the reasons for that. And then most importantly is how it's going to affect local representation, but very, very specifically town and parish councils. And I know a few of you on the call have already stated that you're looking at kind of building a larger grouping of town and parish councils. I'm not sure whether or not in your areas you had urban district councils, but I know in our area we are still dealing with some of the legacy of an urban district council, which is the amalgamation of smaller democratic areas. There are still many, many legacy items from 50 years ago that we haven't really dealt with yet. So, devolution. I am going to refrain from my personal opinion on what devolution is from my perspective, but I don't believe it's designed to save money for the taxpayer. I think this is a centralised government money saving, because those of you who have mayoral authorities may also see a precepting charge on your council tax bill. This is purely designed from central government to transfer some decision-making power from central government into local regions. And I can really, really understand the reasons for doing so. I think there's many things that are centralised that perhaps don't need to be. Now, those powers and functions, as we've seen in other areas across the country, Manchester, for example, where you've got improved access to transport for younger people with free transport in Manchester, which has been promoted by the mayor there. So that's an action of what can work properly. So we know that there's a wide range of what that can look like. Mostly it is transport, housing, skills for employment and the economy and environmental changes. I don't know how that's going to work in my area, for example, where we've got quite a different housing need, specifically North Norfolk. We've got an older population where the housing's expensive, for example. So a lot of our younger people migrate from our district into the city, perhaps, where housing's more expensive. So I'm not sure how those two will connect for our area, but it would be beneficial. And obviously then we've got the wider consideration of what the impact on planning and local plans is there. The actual establishment of the combined authority with the mayor takes time, and the biggest impact on that is creating a new layer of governance, some manoeuvring about of the powers. The timescale for that is quite tricky, and then how long that takes to embed and be useful, we don't really know. But specific to where I am, we started the conversations last year. The devolution paper was published, I think, not long before Christmas. And there is the proposal that there's going to be full national coverage by the end of summer 2029. So the rough outline that the government is giving is that they're looking for devolution areas of about a minimum of 1.5 million, which is quite a lot in some areas. It's not in other areas because we're looking at population density rather than geography. And anybody that knows Norfolk, for example, Norfolk is the geographical equivalent of 20 Birminghams or 2 Luxembourgs. But the population in Norfolk, particularly, is quite sparse. And that's why Norfolk and Suffolk are looking to combine, because they're both beautiful but sparsely populated counties. The devolution paper sets out that there's to be no orphaned areas left behind. So if there is an area that is to be isolated through this, that is wrapped up in the combined authority, which is why there is some jiggery pokery, particularly on the south coast, about making sure that no specific areas are left behind when these big changes are coming. The caveat with going for the priority programme, which many areas did in December, was that an agreement to go to the priority programme meant that you were automatically saying you wanted to go for local government reorganisation as well, which is the unitary model. You couldn't do one without the other. In our area, that's caused some issues where the county council elections were postponed this year. And I'm still undecided about how I feel about that, given that we don't know how long that's going to take. When we look at Norfolk and Suffolk, we submitted proposals and feedback towards the end of January. The government have accepted that feedback and have pushed forward, and we're going for that. And on the 5th of February this year, Norfolk and Suffolk were added to the devolution priority programme. What that means for us is that there's a new combined authority. The dates are very loose, so please forgive me. The goalposts can change, to be expected around the end of this year, where the plan will be in place, with a mayoral election in May next year. But there is no clarity yet for our area specifically about the scope of the mayoral powers. So we don't know whether or not they're going to take policing, for example, whether or not they're going to take everything all at once, or whether or not this is still in negotiation. So devolution for me is quite a positive. If I think about the North, for example, where you see how our young people here have reduced social mobility in terms of transport and housing, and how in the North that's been worked through. And I believe that our young people here have been left behind. So for me, I can see the great positives in devolution locally here. The issue that we do have with the mayoral model is one that we have talked about today earlier on, which is the disconnect from local democracy. But we also know that turnout is quite low, which is difficult. We saw that in the Police and Crime Commissioner elections recently, where turnout was low and people were really, really disconnected from what that looked like. And I think if we look at the figures that I've got here, I think the lowest was in 2024, which was the South Yorkshire mayoral election, and that was a 27% turnout. So local people really do not feel engaged in the democratic process when it comes to elections in this realm, as with the Police and Crime Commissioner. And there's got to be some work that we do on how we bridge that gap to try and get people excited about local and regional politics, and how we can get served better by the people that we have elected. So in this, there's a little bit of work for people to do locally to engage them in the democratic process. My biggest fear is that local people are so tired of being let down politically and not knowing where to turn, that we get a disconnect from local democracy, and that disconnect means that we might just get the wrong person, or we might get somebody who the majority of people didn't really pay attention to and then become unhappy with. So we need to make sure that everybody really, really fully understands what the election is about, and then further understands the role of the mayor. Because if you have a town council with a mayor, there may be some confusion over the powers that your town council mayor has over the powers that a regional or a combined authority mayor has, and I think that's quite a risk here. I know in my specific town, the local people believe our mayor to be all powerful. And sometimes he does have to disappoint people. So there's a little bit of work that we need to do around that. The strategic level that a mayor operates at is often so disconnected from local communities that people won't understand the power that the mayor has, or the impact of what the mayor can achieve, or the strategic decisions they make, how that will impact their daily lives. And a really good way is when we think about, perhaps when we talk about general elections, and people say, oh, it doesn't affect me anyway. But then the concern about how their child's getting to school, or their concern about their local green spaces, or things like that. And it's the power that people have through the democratic process and through their voices that I don't think is realised in local communities. And we need to do a little bit more, perhaps, to reconnect. Not that I'm putting anything more on your shoulders, but you are really sitting amongst our communities with the greatest impact and the greatest ability to spread the knowledge that you are accruing by the work that you're putting in. The other big concern that I have, and this comes a little bit from the white paper, which I will touch on later, is I don't really believe currently that our government, or any existing government prior to that, really understands the power and the place of town and parish councils. I don't think that they realise the work that is done, the part that you all play, and I don't think they realise the importance of your voice in elevating the voice of your local communities to be able to really influence policy decisions. And there is no formal obligation in any of this to engage with town and parish councils, and I feel that it does a massive disservice to the work that you do, but also to the impact that they could have on the decisions that are being made. So there is a huge missing link, and that is you. The biggest impact to the way that we represent and govern locally is coming, and has been coming since, I think it's about 2000, when the London mayor was established. And without local councils, and I mean parish and town councils, being included in governance, we're going to get huge gaps in communication and huge gaps in knowledge. And I'm really concerned about that. Your voice within a combined authority needs to be elevated, and I'm not sure where that works. So if anybody at the end of this session has got fantastic examples of where it works, then I'm willing to take those and proliferate them as far as I can do. But there is no direct voice for town and parish councils that I'm aware that's been established. I know in North Norfolk we have a town and parish forum, and I know that we've done our part in hosting information sessions on this, but it's really, what is the route for town and parish councils to have their voice heard at a mayoral level? So we need to understand. So if anyone has got an example of that, I would really, really benefit from learning more about that. So the engagement structure is not predetermined. There's no set expectation across the mayoral authorities to do this. There is nothing that's set in the white paper to say that this has to happen. There's a very, very loose and fluffy statement which is about strengthening or rewiring the relationships and engagement. And I think there needs to be a bigger commitment from our government to town and parish councils through the devolution process. So the gap that we have is is widening, I fear, through this. The impact, everyone will have an example of a decision that was made by a council, whether or not it was district, county, or unitary, that's had a profound impact on your local communities. And to just have had a conversation or to giving you some more information would have removed that issue, not both for yourselves, but for your local communities. For example, here, and John will be very aware of this, we have got roadworks upon roadworks upon roadworks. We've got a really big scheme in our town, and from one day to the next, we don't know which roads are going to be closed for further roadworks, which creates an issue across the town. Now, the town council here has worked particularly hard in engagement to try and get that level of conversation coming through, but our town clerk on occasion has had to stop people putting barriers up, called me, and we've had to put a call through to get them to stop some work because it would block all entrances to the town. There just isn't that joined up thinking, but you all hold the knowledge about your local communities, and there needs to be more information flow back from our town and parish councils to enable things to run smoother, but to get the most out of our communities. I think local government reorganisation is where I personally am finding it a little bit tricky at the moment. And that's for a number of reasons. The largest reason is, I believe, whatever the question is that the government has, I don't think local government reorganisation is the answer. I don't know what the problem is that they're looking to solve, but I don't believe that this is the only solution, because of the concerns that I've heard from our local town and parish councils here. And whilst from a district council perspective, we do sometimes feel removed from our local areas, I also feel that the county council here is too far removed from a local area. And what I've heard from our local town and parish councils, they're concerned about the gap between them and whatever the unitary council is that's established. So some areas do have unitary status, and I'll be really, really excited to hear what's working well. As much as I would like to hear what isn't working, because anything we can do to share information, I'm really, really happy to engage in. The more we know, the stronger we are together. So my experience is Norfolk and Suffolk. So I will touch a little bit on that, purely so that it might help somebody with the workflow or where we are. But I do know that we've got some Norfolk and Suffolk councils on today. So hopefully we can widen the conversation there. So Norfolk and Suffolk is 2 counties and 12 districts. So we're a large geographical area, sparsely populated, beautiful, lots of coast, lots of rurality, and city areas and borough areas, and we've got town and parish councils. Some of the metropolitan areas in the north don't have town and parish councils. So I feel that Norfolk and Suffolk is quite unique in its demographic, in some of the issues that we face, such as coastal erosion. North Norfolk's got the oldest population in the county. We've got massive expanses of land and road network with poor public transport. And our younger people are often in a more difficult situation because of house prices and work, and have to travel to more populated areas to be able to afford to start their lives. So we've got quite a difficult situation here. So I sit on the cabinet at North Norfolk, and we are having conversations upon conversations about assets, which some of you have touched on today, and how we are looking to preserve assets for the future of our residents. And it's not that we want to push assets onto town and parish councils. We just want to make sure that where taxpayers' money has been invested in things that our communities say they need and want, that they are preserved. And I know that comes with some hesitation for town and parish councils, because if any of you manage a public toilet, for example, you will know the issues that come with that. And you will know the costs, but also the risk to communities if they are removed. Car parks has been mentioned. Car parks are an income generator. So if you're able to take a car park with a public toilet or with a play area, for example, the balance between having an asset and having something that's going to cost you can be offset. So I'd encourage anybody who's going through the local government reorganisation process to potentially start thinking about how you can balance that so you can make a stronger proposal to your local authority. In North Norfolk, we are quite lucky in that we've got a high second homes population. And I say lucky because we get an extra, we put an extra charge on second homes this year. So we are quite lucky. I think it's just short of 10 million overall, of which we get a smaller percent because it obviously gets split between the town parishes, ourselves, the county, and the police. So I'm not sure whether or not when we're being highly courted in North Norfolk to potentially form unitaries with other authorities. I'm not sure whether or not that's because of our fantastic public service delivery or perhaps our extra income through second homes. Either way, I know that we're in a strong position here as other local authorities are. So it's about playing to each other's strengths. So that's from a district perspective. Our initial proposals went into government on the 21st of March. There was a slight split across Norfolk, where the county proposed a single unitary. I think South Norfolk went for two. I think it was Breckland that said they didn't want it at all, and the rest of us all opted for three, with North Norfolk saying we would have three, but only if we had to. And we don't feel that we're in a strong position to really say that we are open-armed unconsciously to devolution. Our business cases have got to be in by the 26th of September. So whilst that feels like it's a long way, 6 months can go really quickly, and our business case has got to be really, really tight. But it's got to be financially balanced. So whilst the government are focused on finances here, I feel like our residents are slightly forgotten in the government's mission, and it should be about better outcomes. But obviously, I'm not the Chancellor of the Exchequer, so I don't realise or fully understand the pressures they're under. So this is a very, very local perspective. So if the business cases are sent in September and accepted, we anticipate that shadow elections will be May 2027, and the shadow unitary will form and be in place for approximately a year before the unitaries take over, and the full transition is expected to be by the 1st of April 2028. So it's a really long time. And that length of time causes lots and lots of concern here. One of the largest concerns that we have, which has already been voiced earlier on, is the number of elected people. So where we have, I'll use North Norfolk because that's my knowledge base. We've got 40 district councillors in North Norfolk, and I think 84 at the county. So we're going to see a reduction of local elected representatives at a unitary, and we'll have to, because there's going to be no space big enough to house everybody if we stuck with the district council ward sizes, and if we stuck to the county council division sizes, then we're going to have people who are representing a far larger and varied council over a larger area. So I know personally, you will see it yourselves, planning applications, for example, if you're looking after 4 wards with planning issues, and on top of that, you've got your highways issues and everything else that goes with it, social services, children's services. It would be miss of me if I didn't mention dog poo, because that will focus on your agendas as much as it will focus on our agendas as local people. And you've got such a variation of issues there over such a wider geography that I fear we're going to have people who are struggling perhaps to meet the need of our local communities, because it is such a variation. The other concerns, I guess, and the change that will come is the removal of people who work for councils from their local area and position further away. So I think that has to be something that's considered. So, for example, planning officers. I know our office is in Cromer, and you will hear from at the end of the district, say Wells, for example. Well, they sit in Cromer, they don't know Wells. But if we have a more centralised planning team, the risk of them not knowing the full geography area is there. And I think that has got to be on our minds, especially when we're consulted locally on planning applications, because our communities are most affected by planning applications, poor road networks, and bin collections. Those are the possibly the top three complaints that I personally receive anyway. So when we have people who are removed from a local area because they've got larger patches to cover from a democratic perspective, your elected councillors, there's a potential there that they're going to lose the connection that they have with local communities, because the geography is much bigger. And if you lose that, you're going to lose knowledge. And if you've got to cover a larger area, then the accountability goes as well. And I think that is a concern. But again, it comes back to our council taxpayers and the people that make the decisions. And sometimes that's an officer's decision, and sometimes that's a councillor decision. And we cannot widen the gap between our residents and the councils and the councillors that represent them anymore. I feel that there's a disconnect already that exists, and town and parish councils, if you have good councillors with you, you will know the power of having a good district, county, or unitary councillor with you, but you will equally know when that wanes a little bit and the struggle that comes with that. And what we don't want is people who are trying to serve local areas becoming overly stretched. So I'm really grateful for the conversation that we had leading into this, because I feel like many of these issues are issues that you all share. So I know that I'm not sat here feeling any kind of concern which is isolated. So I really, really appreciate that. So we've talked about assets, which is really important. I know that was bridged before, and I'm happy for that to be a conversation point when we move on to discussion level. We've talked about the removal of democracy, which was touched upon, and the uncertainty that comes with the changes. So if there's anything else that comes up, please do let me know. But the democratic and the representation issue is my biggest concern for town and parish councils, because the gap between yourselves and your council needs to be smaller, not bigger. And I feel that is at risk currently, much more than I feel that was at risk prior to this. But it's the voices of our local communities which sometimes go unheard at a larger level, that we need to figure out collectively how we're going to amplify, because we've got huge impacts to make. And if we know anything about the most recent of years, where our communities have suffered the most with the cost of living crisis, with the difficulties with the economy just coming out of the pandemic, we know that the power sits with town and parish councils, their local councillors, and the communities they sit in, because when things go wrong, it's you that are there to pick up the pieces. So the white paper, I don't know if any of you have read it. It's interesting in many, many ways. It sets out the piece for devolution. It sets out the vision for what local democracy should look like. But in the whole paper, there is one sentence, I believe, I can't remember off the top of my head, about town and parish councils. And it's not very specific. It's about strengthening the relationship and engagement there's nothing beyond that. It does not recognise nor set out a vision for town and parish councils. And that makes me feel that town and parish councils are potentially misunderstood and undervalued by the government. And I'm not sure whether or not that's because we don't have town and parish councils everywhere, or because our town and parish councils are generally cautiously and quietly getting on with the day to day in their communities. And generally with such pleasure and grace that it's very, very rare that you will kick up a fuss if things aren't working well, and it has to work really, really badly before you will become louder. I did touch on before the local resilience part of it, and I know many of you throughout the pandemic, for example, would have stepped in with checking on neighbours, delivering medications, supermarkets, phoning people, just making sure everyone's okay. And I don't believe that was fully acknowledged. We've seen it here, for example, in Walcott, which is a coastal village that suffered some anger from the sea, and there was a flood just over 10 years ago, a little bit longer ago than that now. And we've since put some further work into there to protect that community. But at the point that homes were flooded in Walcott, it was the local area, the parish council that stepped in to support. So I don't believe that enough is done to acknowledge not only the role that you play, but the resilience that you provide day in and day out when things are difficult for people. The engagement side of it, there isn't a formal request for it. If it was legislated that it had to happen, or if it formed part of the rule set that you had to be engaged with, then I would feel far more comfortable. So again, I'm really happy to learn how you're invited to engage with your combined authorities. That would be really, really powerful for me to understand, because we need to make sure that everybody is served equally across the nation, really. And I don't think that the white paper highlights that enough. And then the final point is what we've already touched on, which is the new responsibilities that town and parish councils might have. And it's not grass verges or playgrounds. It is new concerns, like was raised earlier about libraries. It's public toilets, it's buildings, it's ponds, it's taking on unadopted roads and street lights from housing developments. There is no responsibility, guidance, or rule set yet about how that will be distributed. We've asked central government what their advice is, what they would suggest to us. There's nothing coming forward. So every location will be doing this differently, but it's what support is in place for town and parish councils when you do have assets and potentially not the team to manage the asset, or the experience to understand how asset management works, or even the power of scale to make sure that you're getting the best deal. If you need electricians or plumbers or hopeful car parks tarmacked, how do we work that out for people? So there is no clarity on that, and I'm a little bit concerned that the support won't be there, and you'll be left to your own devices, which is clerks and councillors. Could be an optimistic challenge, and equally could be an added layer of stress that you don't need in your role. So there are some considerations and questions that I think all of you should be thinking about, myself included. And this is perhaps a conversation to have with councillors when you are next meeting. Will you have a seat at the table? So will you be equally listened to and heard, or will you just get the new responsibilities? And I think that is a really, really important factor, because whilst we have lots of assets in North Norfolk, for example, our beautiful pier, if you haven't visited, it was Pier of the Year last year. It's a very, very beautiful structure. It's Grade 2 listed, and it's expensive to maintain. So The concern is when people take on responsibilities, will there be an equal flow of information backwards and forwards? Will there be support in how these new responsibilities are adopted? But also, will you be equally listened to? You're not just there to pick up the verges or the playgrounds that were funded by 106 or SIL and now need taking care of and are expensive. You need to be there with your local councils with an active voice because you will be bridging the democratic deficit that is impending with the changes that are coming. When the mayor develops their strategies, will they sit with you? Will they come and listen to you? Will they understand what it is that you want for your communities or how things impact you? Will they understand how your young people go to college? Will they understand how your families travel to work or the difficulties that families face having two vehicles or using public transport? Will they understand how our older population needs support accessing medical care? Will they sit with us and will they develop very, very local strategies? Will they develop local engagement strategies? Will they be with us listening to us? And I think that is important, and it obviously was very missed from the white paper. And the biggest importance is the voices of our local communities. And as clerks and councillors and parish and town council staff, where will your voice be? And what will be left if your voice isn't heard? And that is something that is really, really important, because if the mayor doesn't know what your community wants or needs, what will your community miss out on? And I think these are things that we really, really need to consider going forward. So I've got a couple of points for reflection, because these are personal things that I want to hear back from you. I don't mean to steer the conversation so heavily, but I've got some things that I would really like you to consider and perhaps discuss when we break shortly. So you guys, you know how you're best engaged, you know what it is that you want and you need, but how would a really, really constructive relationship look with both the mayor and a unitary authority? What is that going to look like to you? What are the non-negotiables? What is it that's going to make it easier for you to understand what's going on and how best to influence? We all know that if a council puts a survey on a website, they're not going to get the most out of a local community. They're not going to really, really hear what is said in the coffee shop, like John alluded to earlier. They're not going to know how people feel when they're in the parks and their markets. So what does really, truly meaningful engagement look like at a community level? And I mean meaningful, I don't mean a survey that goes out and disappears within a week. I mean truly meaningful. And what support will be needed for town and parish councils to take on new roles? And I don't mean, here's an asset, get on with it. Aren't we great? We've saved it for the community. I mean, really think about what it is you don't know, and what it is you would like to understand. So I feel like I've talked at you for a really, really long time, and I apologise for that. So for me, local leadership really, really does matter. And it's really, really important to me. And we've got to protect it and respect it and make sure it's involved. We have to do that for our communities. And without our voices, we're not going to make much change. So we have chances now to shape what the future of our communities look like. And we don't just have to do what people say we have to do because it's coming. We do truly have an opportunity to make it and adapt to it. We can change this. And I would just like to really thank you for listening to me non-stop. My colleagues would be fidgeting in their seats